The description of Jacob's fear here contains two verbs. Vayir'a Yaakov me'od, Jacob was very afraid. Vayetzer lo, and he was distressed. Our translation reads it as Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided, but there's actually a sort of semicolon after Vayetzer lo in the Hebrew, right? So the Midrash asks what's the difference, why these two verbs, and what's the difference. And I'll come back to this later. I just want to point it out now. Rashi answers by saying, and he's quoting the Midrash here, he was afraid vayir'a of being killed, vayetzer lo, and he was greatly distressed at the thought lest he kill, right? Lest he actually kill Esav or be responsible for the deaths of others in Esav's camp by the hand of his camp, right? So we have here both the fear for our own well-being physically and our moral integrity. And I want to we'll come back to that. Focus this morning on two related questions. The first emerges from that moment in the text where Jacob fears lest he be killed, and is distressed lest he kill. And I want to suggest that one big question that lurks underneath this text is about which is the greater danger: threats from without or threats from within. Whether we're talking about within an individual, right, the moral compromise of one's own dark side, or threats from within the Jewish community. So this is expressed in some ways by the classic rabbinic interpretation of what this angel looked like. And one opinion is the angel appeared as a heathen, as an idol worship, which is the threat from the outside, that one would be influenced by idolatry from without. But another opinion said the angel appeared as a Torah scholar, as a Talmid Chacham, right? And this is a way of saying, yeah, we got to wrestle with our own internal demons as well, right? With a sense of guilt and the way in which the Torah can go astray. Here also is another reading on this question. This is the Radak, who is Rabbi David Kimchi, a classic commentator on the Torah. And he asked the question, why does it say that Jacob was struck b'chaf yerecho, which is sort of the ball of the hip, but yerech is used sometimes for loins, right? The source of progeny. And so Radak says that the angel hinted to him that whereas Esau would not be able to overpower him, danger lurked for him from another source, that someone of his own children would cause him grief. Right? Like that the angel was saying, you're so worried about Esau. You don't have to worry about Esau. Mind your own house. Something's going to happen from within. And here are the words of contemporary Torah scholar and teacher Rav Moshe Lichtenstein. And this is from a piece that he wrote 3 years ago. The sin of Shimon and Levi, later in the parsha, where this is a parsha in which Jacob's daughter Dinah is raped by Shem, son of Hamor, and Shimon and Levi, in response, kill the entire town. Right, and that is viewed by many as a sin. Right, it's one thing to take care of Dinah, and it's one thing to hold the perpetrator accountable. It's another thing to destroy the whole town. And there are many commentators that see that as a sin. So he brings that issue here, and listen to what he says. Yaakov dealt with all the external threats and emerged unscathed. And it was precisely within his own home that sins and tensions emerged that created a real risk to the continuity of the family remaining on the right path. This point is part of a general message that emerges from the book of Bereshit. External threats can be dealt with, but an internal threat can bring down the house. It seems that in our time too, right? This is 3 years ago. Although we are surrounded by external threats, our main attention should be directed towards our moral behavior. We must carefully examine our relationships with the foreign nations that surround us and guard against the influence of foreign sources that encourage violence as a way of life and ideology. Right? This, by the way, this is coming from Moshe Lichtenstein, is in the Gush Etzion, in the territories in the West Bank in Israel, writing this 3 years ago, that the greater threat is not the threat on the border. The greater threat is the immorality within. And he goes on to say that Shimon and Levi, Jacob's sons, have grown up in the house of Lavan, right? And Lavan, we know, is famous for deceit and injustice. Lavan is, in his words, a swindler and thief, quote, who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. And so Lichtenstein notes that as children growing up in that household, they saw Lavan give legitimacy to immoral actions, and they learned from that. Right? This is the problem. And that takes us back to what I noted Rashi's point, right? That Jacob's fear and distress, fear that he would be killed and distress that he might kill others. This fear is both forward-looking, right, in anticipating his encounter with Esau, but also backward-looking. How have these 20 some odd years in Lavan changed him? Has he become a killer? What influence did Lavan have on him and his household? And if we think about the moment that we meet him here, presages the direct aftermath of the Exodus from Egypt, right? There are all kinds of parallels between Jacob's life and the national story of the enslavement in Egypt and the Exodus. And the time in Lavan's house for Jacob parallels the enslavement in Egypt. And so this parallels just post-Exodus, right? The escape from the oppressive regime. That's where Jacob is. And one can say that the entire Torah post the Exodus, right, is about having taken the Israelites out of Egypt. How do we now take the Egyptian consciousness and morality and values out of the Israelites? What is the impact on us of living in times where illegitimate acts are lifted up as legitimate, where morality has gone out the window, where the rule of law has disappeared, where one would do anything to get what one wants, and violence is and deceit and injustice is the norm, right? How has that time in Lavan's house changed him and his household for good and for ill? And I want to say that this is the second big question that the Torah asks us, which is the question of how we are changed by our experiences and how we remain true to them. And that's about true to who we are. And this is related to the question of external and internal threats, right? There is a tension between needing to stay true to who we are, holding on to core values, morality, our identity and essence, right? And we can remember the the passage it's in Pirkei Avot, Uvamakom she'ein anashim hishtadel hiot ish. In a place where there are not people, mensches, right? In a place where no one is a mensch, strive to be a mensch. When we are living as we are in these dehumanizing times, we have to strive to retain our humanity. That's one pole. On the other hand, there is a need to learn from and allow oneself to be shaped by experience and a relationship, an encounter, the possibility of transformation and growth, right? Like how do we sit with that? And I want to say that the text presents the challenge between change as corruption and change as evolution. When do we hold on and when do we let go? Right? And if it is only about holding on, then there is no ability to take account of our own failings and our own need to change, and no ability to adapt. But if we are only focusing on adapting, then we can lose our core values. And I want to say that normally we see Jacob holding on and demanding blessing in this wrestling section, right? This wrestling match where he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. Normally, we see that as a positive model, right? Stay in the struggle until it yields blessing. And it is a positive, like we can read it that way. It's a very positive model, right? That we stay in ambiguity and difficulty and struggle until it yields some lesson and blessing. And I want to offer some commentaries that open a more nuanced and maybe challenging reading of that moment. So here again is our friend Radak, right? The one who reads the angel as teaching Jacob that the truer threat is from within. It's the own inner morality and the own, right? Not the external. And here's what he says on this question of the holding on to blessing, on the holding on. The angel said, Shalcheni, let me go, release me. He meant that the angel had been sent by God to Jacob to demonstrate to him by an actual encounter that he would not overcome him, that Jacob would not be overwhelmed by the angel by the angel, and therefore that a mere being such as Esau would certainly not be able to harm him. The point of the wrestling was to teach Jacob that he needn't be afraid of that external threat. And the angel said, now that I have accomplished my mission, please let me go. In other words, unless you have another request from me, I'm leaving. I've done the job, right? And Jacob said, then indeed he did want something else of him, and until he was granted it, he wouldn't let the angel go. He wanted to receive the blessing. And therefore the angel added the words, Ki Allah hashachar, because the dawn has come, meaning it's already morning. And Yaakov had no reason to be afraid, as the night, the time for fear, had already passed. And during daylight, there was no reason for him to be concerned about being alone. So in other words, the Radak is reading this as Jacob demanding blessing because he hadn't actually learned the right lesson from the wrestling. The blessing had come. It was time to let go. And the blessing was the lesson. You're afraid of the wrong things. The night has passed. Don't hold on to old fears of the night once the metaphoric sun has risen and the morning has come, right? What you need to be worried about is your own morality and your own household. Don't waste your energy being afraid of Esau, projecting out all the danger, right? And Jacob was holding on because he missed the lesson. Okay, that's one. Here's an even more trenchant teaching. And this is the one that I brought last night that I want to come back to now. And this is Hamek Davar, the Netziv of Berlin, 18th century. And he's reading verse 26 of chapter 32, where there is a little bit of repetition. So if you look at the text, in verse 25 on page 201, it reads, Jacob was left alone, and an Ish wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And then in verse 26, when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip in its socket so that the socket of the hip was strained. And then we get the language, behe avko imo, when he wrestled with him. We already know he wrestled with him. We just read that he wrestled with him. So what's going on? Listen to the Hamek Davar. He says, this is extra language. We don't need this, right? And because the previous verse tells us that an Ish wrestled with him. And the Gemara, he says, offers a drash on this. But here's the plain meaning. The plain meaning is that now it means Jacob wrestled with, i.e., attacked the Ish. For up to now, the angel wrestled with Jacob, right? Jacob is alone, and the angel comes and sort of grabs him and attacks him. But now, the angel wanted to withdraw his hand from him. The angel wants to stop. And Jacob, returned, Chazar, he returned back to the fight. He engaged in like for like. He gave back as he was given, right? And now he wrestled with the angel. This is vengeance. The angel wants to release his hand, and Jacob is going after him. And he then goes on, Hamek Davar, saying, as for scripture saying he dislocated the ball of his thigh, right? Chaf Yorecho. This was on account of the fact that Yaakov's character was ahavat shalom, to love peace, and the attribute of generosity, gedusha, not kedusha with a ka, gedusha with a gimel, which is this like overflowing giving, right? That's who he claimed to be. And therefore here, he should have similarly let it rest when the angel released his hold from him, and he should not have stood on his right to demand recompense. The language is avar al midato, which is you pass over the measure to which you are entitled, right? Someone owes me, I don't claim what I'm entitled to. I don't ask for measure. I don't respond. I don't meet violence with violence, right? And therefore, he was punished in the thigh, which is the place of walking. And what the Netziv, the Hamek Davar says, is that basically he violated his own commitment to the path of peace and generosity that he had committed to, which is like a vow. When you commit to being a certain way, you have to, you violate that, you have extra punishment. That's what happened. And he goes on to say, and it comes to teach the generations, Maseh Avot Ot Levanim, right? This is why we don't eat that thigh muscle, because we have to remember that if we as the people of Israel have committed to certain ways of being in the world, we have to uphold them. And we do not seek vengeance, and we do not go at, we don't become the rodev, the pursuer, when the person who has pursued us has backed off. Right? This is actually related to the law of self-defense, right? Like you can engage in self-defense, but once the threat is gone, you pursue, you're liable. Okay. So this is right. What the Hamek Devar is saying is that Jacob simultaneously held on when he shouldn't and changed when he shouldn't. He should have held fast to his love of peace and generosity, and that he let go. And he should have released his anger and the conflict and the fear and the need to fight, and that he held on to. It's I was floored when I read this. Is an extraordinary reading, right? And he goes on, because the part that he taught that I quoted last night, he goes further into this, right? And what he says is, he was reading very closely the text. He's reading Vayishlach lo Hashemesh. The sun rose for him, which is the literal meaning of the text. Midrash says it rose specifically to heal him. And he says, the Netziv, the sun rose to heal his pain, right? His pain from being struck. But Jacob then realized afterwards that he was still limping. I won't read it in the text. I'll summarize, because he's reading very closely the text. And until this moment, Jacob had thought that when the pain ended, when the pain was lifted, he would go back to walking exactly the way he had been, unchanged. And now the sun rose and healed his pain, and he's still limping. Right? And this causes him to realize that he had been wrong about the encounter with the angel. He thought he had totally prevailed, and the angel had totally lost. And now he realizes that that wasn't the case, that he won somewhat, and the angel won somewhat, and each one had the better of the other in particular ways, right? And this is this I have to read in the original. Uval lamdenu ech lehitnaheg im mitkomamav, right? This comes to teach us how one should behave with those who rise against us, those who rise up to challenge us, that one should not vie with them, compete and fight biyoter, excessively. V'cha'asher yasor hapachad, when the threat and the fear is removed, ra'ui lahaniach et harodef lelech ledarcho. It is appropriate to leave be the pursuer, the attacker, to go on his way. This is what he was saying earlier. Right? It's the rodef, the pursuer. The rodef is the one you're allowed to kill. Someone's pursuing you, you're allowed to kill them. But not to excess. This is how it's a remarkable read, right? So a couple of things I want to say about this. First of all, he's reading this wrestling match with the angel as a lesson to Jacob to get out of the binary mentality. right? Rashi's source for that, he was frightened lest he be killed, and he's distressed lest he kill others. The original proof text in the Midrash says that he thought either he's going to prevail and kill me, or I'm going to prevail and kill him. And he was worried maybe Esau, because he was living in Eretz Yisrael all this time when I was not, and he was observing the mitzvah of honoring parents when I was far away, maybe he's more virtuous than I am. So he's going to win and I'm going to lose, right? This is very binary thinking. One of us is morally superior. One of us is right and one of us is wrong. One of us is going to win and the other one is going to die. And this read of the Netziv says, no, the point of the wrestling match was to evoke Jacob's character of gracious generosity, to get him out of that binary and teach him you have to allow the other grace. Better that both win a little and both lose a little. This is not a zero-sum game. The angel prevailed a little and you emerge limping, and you prevail a little and you got the blessing. This is not an either or. One of you isn't all right and all wrong, right? That's unhelpful binary thinking that the angel is trying to push him out of and that he doesn't get. And the Netziv, right, is reminding us that Jacob thought that he could emerge unchanged from this struggle. But the limp teaches him otherwise. It's a change in his way of walking, of moving throughout the world, to remind him that he had exactly reversed what he was supposed to hold onto and what he was supposed to let go of. And it's a lesson for all of us to ongoingly, the Gid Hanashe, right? So that we will remember that. Jacob, as he holds on to this anger and the relationship with his brother that is so fraught, and he holds on to the fear, Jacob is a holder on. He was born grasping his brother's heel. And that holding on becomes a tenacious persistence that can slide into stubbornness and rigidity, and holding on to old patterns and ways of being that themselves end up leading him, causing him to fail to uphold his core commitments that should never be compromised. The Ahavat Shalom and the Gedusha, the generosity, right? It's not that the tenaciousness is wrong, it's that it has to be measured. It has to be in the right measure and the right time. And if we are too tenacious and holding on to what's been done wrong to us, we will not be able to hold on to the things most dear to us. I hear in his teaching here also the wisdom of age, right? The changes in our bodies that teach us as the hips get stiff and we walk a little differently, right? That teach us about accepting inevitable external changes in our physical reality and changes in the situation in which we find ourselves, and learning to adapt to reality rather than fight it, rather than hold on to what was, right? That both requires and makes possible the holding on to the best within us and the core of our character. We need that good character in order to allow ourselves to change. And allowing ourselves and things to change is what enables us to retain our character. Because if we hold on to the wrong things, we become fearful and small and angry and violent and hostile and all those terrible things, right? It's such a beautiful reading that he's giving. And he he brings it at the end with his last comment, the Hamek Davar, talks about why specifically the Gid Hanashe, that sinew in that part of the animal that is prohibited for us to eat because Jacob was wounded there. And he says it's because that's a hard, unyielding part of the body. It's too firm, right? And it's a reminder that the way of being should be soft. And he quotes the Talmud that a person should always be flexible like a reed and not stiff and hard like a cedar tree, right? It's not about being flexible on our morals. It's a different kind of flexibility. So I'll close with one last comment on this issue of what we learn from outside and change and what we hold fast to, because I think this is really very much the moment that we're in, right? In America and in Israel, there will be a time when we come out of the house of Lavan, when we exit from Egypt, when the culture of lies and violence and get anything goes in order to get what I want and all of that, right? When we will emerge from that. And the question for us in this time is then what? Right? How will we need to change? What are the lessons that we need to learn? And here's the Eish Kodesh writing in 1939 in Poland. And he asked the question about Jacob saying, I will not let you leave unless you bless me. I will not let go until it yields blessing. What is he looking for? And he says as following, the stories of the lives of the patriarchs always convey a lesson for us. Jacob encountered the angel, struggled with him, and sustained damage when the angel touched upon his sciatic nerve. Then the angel made his preparations to leave. And Jacob said, is that it? Is this to be the fate of my children? After they have suffered all the pain and sustained all the damage inflicted on them, is this to be their whole victory? That they survived? That their enemies failed to finish them off? And will they then simply revert to the same state they were in before all their suffering? It must not be. This is why Jacob said, I will not let you leave unless you bless me. He was trying to ensure that after the suffering, not only would their enemies leave them alone, but that there would also be some new salvation from God. Right? This is, I think, where we need to be sitting right now in all of our struggles. It is not enough to survive. What will we learn from this? How will we be different? What in our own behavior will we confront that contributed to the moment that we are in all the contexts that we are struggling, that we will understand we need to change? What are we going to hold on to as the values that are most important that we want to carry into the next iteration of society here and in Israel and in our own personal lives, right? What are we going to, and what needs to change in order for those core values and ways of being and morality to be able to be lasting? Because we can't just go back to what was. We have to move forward to something new and transformed.